Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Welcome to Meet the Author. I'm Zina Shevchik. Today we have as our guest, we're very privileged to have as our guest, Robin Oliveira, who just recently had her historical novel published. It's called My Name is Mary Sutter, and it's set during the Civil War era. And a good quarter to a third of the book is also set in Albany. So we're thrilled to have her with us today. Welcome home, Robin.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here.
And will you tell us about your local roots here, about, I think, growing up in Loudonville area, correct?
I did. I grew up in Loudonville for most of my life at 15 Paul Holly Drive, right off of Loudon Road. Went to Loudonville Elementary School and Shaker High School and graduated in 1972. And then left the area.
And you're living in Seattle now, right?
Yes, I do.
Yes, so you've come a long way, and we thank you for it. But you have quite a schedule today. You're going to be at the Prine House this afternoon and at the Book House tonight. This is being, by the way, taped on July 26, 2010, in case we broadcast this in the future. Before we start talking about the book, why don't you tell us more about your local connection? Because by talking with you and by looking at your publisher's page, you actually did research here in the town of Colonie, and with the town historian. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. Yeah, with Kevin Franklin.
And you also went to Vermont College, and you got a master's in fine arts. Am I correct?
You are correct. I went to Vermont College of Fine Arts in Montpelier. It's a low residency program for writing. It sort of mimics the life of a writer. So you spend 10 days on campus for every 6 months for 2 years before you graduate. So I did have to come, and every time I flew toward Burlington, Vermont from Chicago, I'd look down and think, there's Albany. But during the research for the book, I came here a couple of times, specifically to research at the Albany Institute of History and Art, but also at the Town of Colonie Historical Society with Kevin Franklin, who's the town historian. And also someone at the county records, a woman named Jill Hughes, helped me with some very specific information about Loudon Road. But I had also been here before because I have a book in the drawer that was also centered in Albany, and I came down to look at where the old lumber district was in Albany, down at Erie and Hudson, and the old railroad bridge that went across in 1863 when they built it. So I've been back quite a bit, even though my family has all moved away now.
So you don't have local family in the local area right now?
No, my parents died in the 80s and early 90s, and my sister, who used to live here, has now gone away, which is very sad, but I feel connected very much to the area by this book.
And I, too, by reading your book, was fascinated. I don't live in the town of Colonie, and I haven't lived in Albany either, but I found it fascinating. The first 5 chapters are set in Albany exclusively, and I was fascinated by references to things I knew, things I didn't know, and so it was very compelling for me. I want to ask you about the success of this book, because it has been received, it's received much critical acclaim, and it's also a popular success. I found out that it's on Oprah Winfrey's magazine's top 10 summer reading list.
Yes.
And, that's a rare occurrence for any author. So was there an expectation when you were writing this book that there was going to be such a reception?
Certainly not on my part, no. I just always hoped that it might find an audience of readers who might love the characters as much as I did. That it would be so well received was a big surprise and very gratifying. I never expected it, never.
Well, I saw that you actually received a grant while you were in the middle of writing this book. And can you talk about that grant? Because I guess I would assume then that someone had seen the manuscript and decided that it was certainly worth supporting.
That grant that you're talking about is the James Jones First Novel Fellowship. And you apply, it's a national foundation, you apply for the fellowship, and it's 50 pages are submitted in the first round, and 630 people applied the year that I applied, which was 2007. And they read through all those manuscripts, and then they make a short list, and then you send in 100 pages. And the fellowship is specifically designed to support writers in the first stages of writing a novel. It was done that way because James Jones, who wrote The Thin Red Line and From Here to Eternity, was helped a great deal by patrons when he first began writing. And so in that spirit, the James Jones Literary Society and specifically James Jones' daughter, Kaylee Jones, decided that this would be a great thing to do to support new novelists. When I applied, I was actually on the verge of quitting writing the book because I had no idea if it was good or not. I had reached one of those points where I just would read it and think, this is terrible. So I sent it in with great hopes, and then sure enough, the day I got the call from Kaylee Jones was one of the most extraordinary moments, because I thought, I really was. I was on the verge of quitting, and when I told Kaylee that, I saw her in New York City recently, she was so happy that they had decided to design the grant, because then really I don't think this book would have been published without that fellowship.
Well, that's wonderful that somebody had the foresight to see the potential here.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Mary Sutter and the line of the story.
Well, Mary Sutter is a 20-year-old midwife from Albany and Ireland's Corners. Her family came from Ireland's Corners, which was Loudonville, became Loudonville in 1870. She is a preternaturally gifted midwife. She comes from a long line of midwives. Her mother is Amelia Sutter, and she is French, and she has come from a long line of French midwives. Amelia wants more, not Amelia. Mary wants more. She wants to be a surgeon, and the reason she wants to be a surgeon is she watched her father Nathaniel die, and she thought that she could do a much better job than the doctors, and so she decided she wanted to be a surgeon. She has a twin sister, a fraternal twin sister named Jenny, and a younger beloved brother named Christian. And she tries to get into medical school here at the Albany Medical College. And this is 1860 and 1861, and no women were admitted to Albany Medical College at that time. And so she's also in love with someone. And when that doesn't work out for her, she ends up going to the Civil War, because the Civil War breaks out on the very day she discovers that Dr. Marsh at the Albany Medical College is not going to admit her. And she ends up going to the Civil War to work at the Union Hotel Hospital, which is and has been universally acknowledged as one of the worst Civil War hospitals ever. It was an old, dilapidated building. The federal government took it over in order to house Union soldiers because there were far more wounded and far more sick than they had ever anticipated. And Mary goes there to try to see if she can become a nurse, because she thinks that might be one way she can at least try to learn something of medicine. She wants to be apprenticed.
Now, tell us about being a surgeon versus being a doctor versus being a midwife, because I've found that interesting that they were defined as surgeons. Did that mean doctors?
Yes,
in a broad sense?
That meant surgeon was interchangeable with the word doctor. They were all called surgeons, and a midwife was not trained the way they are now. A midwifery was passed down from generation to generation. There were no midwifery schools, as well as there were no nursing schools at the time. So it was midwifery was a tradition of healing. And surgery, to become a surgeon, was to become a physician. And you only went to school to become a surgeon for 6 months, unlike now, when it takes much longer.
Many, many years. And
Yes.
thank goodness it takes much longer.
Yeah.
Given the descriptions in your books, in your book about actually what the doctors could do and could not do, more importantly, I guess. Didn't know how to take care of what we take for granted these days, simple operations, simple procedures. So it was very eye-opening for me as well. Now, I understand you were a registered nurse, are a registered nurse. I don't know how to phrase that. So did that kind of give you some of the medical background to provide the details in this book?
Yeah, I am a registered nurse. I worked in critical care and bone marrow transplant, and also for a very brief period of time in ante and postpartum. So I knew a little bit about obstetrics. And it was very helpful because it was very easy to go back and read the medical literature of the time and see where they were going wrong and what misconceptions they had. And the vocabulary was very easy for me to understand. The pathophysiology of what was happening was very easy for me to understand. So as opposed to someone else trying to write this book who didn't have a medical background, I would say I had a bit of a leg up for all of that.
So is that where it was? Can you define a time when the germ of this book came to you? Is it? I'm fascinated. I'll tell you that I watch Charlie Rose on PBS, and he interviews, besides a lot of actors, he interviews a lot of writers, and he always asks about the process of writing. And I'm fascinated too, because I just see myself as not a creative person at all. So that process fascinates me. So would you talk a little bit about, the germ of this?
How it came to be.
Came to be, and how you write?
Before the germ of this book happened, just for any writers who might be watching, I spent about 7 or 8 years writing really bad short stories, and one novel that was universally almost accepted but finally rejected. And at that point, I decided I needed to get a little more help, so I ended up getting my MFA in writing at Vermont. But this particular book, after that long apprenticeship in writing, came to me when the character of Mary Sutter came to me in a vision, believe it or not, when I was dusting my dining room. She just appeared, actually fully clothed, almost in this very dress that you see today. And she was she was seated at a table much like this, sort of old and hewn, and she had bookshelves around her filled with books. And she was looking through a microscope, and there was a candle right next to her on the stage, and she was alone, seated sort of on a bench. And I just remember seeing her, and it just happened to occur at the same time. An Indian summer in Seattle, where I live, is just like the most beautiful time of year. And it's, summer there is terrible. It's always raining, and I just love the sunshine, and it's really hard sometimes to live in Seattle. And there's a mountain thrush that sings in our backyard to us during Indian summer. It's got this incredible operatic song. It goes from very low register to very high, and it has this really yearning note. So I was feeling, the bird was singing, and they had this sense of yearning, and I was mourning the passing of Indian summer. And then I saw this woman, and sort of all of that swirling around together gave me this sense of a woman who yearns for something. And then I discovered that, so I started to do research in women in science, who this woman might be. And that's when I discovered that 17 young women became surgeons out of their experiences in the Civil War as nurses or volunteers. And then I knew my time period. I knew she was in the Civil War, and I knew she wanted to be a doctor. And that was how the whole book started.
And I've heard watching again Charlie Rose and other interviews, I've heard that from quite a few authors, that they are visions, their imagination is just moving along, and they come up with ideas. And I love that you were dusting at the time.
I was dusting.
That's great, not prosaic. I also read that you love to do research. I mean, that's almost your first love.
Yeah.
And does that come from when you were a young girl, or college, or something just innate in you?
Well, I think, at the heart of who I am probably a student more than I am anything else. But I am that kid, in recess was going on, and I was always the one trying to slip away so I could sit in the corner of the library and read. Loudonville Elementary School, I would pull these books off the shelves and hide in the corner so that they wouldn't make me go out and play dodgeball. So that's probably where it started, a
Great.
fear of dodgeball.
That's great. That's wonderful. I think the idea that you are a registered nurse and so practical, and that yet you're saying you're a student before anything else is fascinating, because it seems like that just juxtaposition of critical care nursing with doing research in a dusty old library somewhere is a very interesting contrast. So do you find a conflict or just a meshing of those parts of yourself when you're writing? Is that?
It probably makes me write a particular kind of novel. I recently read a wonderful novel that's just coming out. It's called The Blind Contessa's New Machine. It's by a young woman named Carrie Wallace, and she wrote this absolute confection of a short, it's almost a novella, about the beginning, the invention of the typewriter. Again, a very prosaic thing, but it's the most glorious little sort of gem that you can possibly imagine. I tend to write, that practicality thing in me. I need to know what exactly the particular road looked like. I needed to know exactly what the doctors were doing, and that sort of practicality leads me to an awful lot of fact-based research. But then on top of that, I do have this imagination. My mother used to complain about my imagination all the time because I was always saying, but what if this happened, or what if that happened? So I think it's probably I just have two pretty strong sides to my nature. And
Lucky for us.
yeah.
Now, you're saying you wrote a lot of short stories, and you have at least one novel, I assume, in a drawer.
I
You say,
do.
are they also science-based? Have some kind of science or medicine to them? And what about the future writing as well?
Well, not the bad short stories. Those were just all disasters. That first novel actually is also based in Albany, and it was about the building of the first railroad bridge across the Hudson River in 1863. It's still there, that railroad trestle over the Hudson.
Yes.
That process was actually really fascinating, the way that happened. And so I think I probably tend toward some of those more interesting science-based kinds of things. The future writing, actually this is so interesting now that you bring it up, I didn't think about it, also has a great deal of science that's not medical, but a great deal of almost engineering that I'm having to do a whole crash course in engineering in order to write the novel, both in railroads and mining. And so, I guess I do tend toward the science.
So there's that's your fascination, then, maybe to learn. I get it. It's to learn.
It's to learn.
And I assume you have to absorb. This is what is fascinating to me, is that when you do research, that you really have to absorb to come out, to be able to create something like this that has so many details that are historically accurate,
Yes.
and yet you're writing a fictional character as well. So.
Yes. There's that, somebody asked me, how do you avoid making it like a 3x5 card so that you end up with all this stuff just coming out? And the thing is that, the first or second or third draft, it might come out like a 3x5 card. And I almost have to write it that way, in this very boring way, in order to internalize it. So just then suddenly I know it. And all those facts become what the characters are living, rather than stuff I have to tell the reader. That's how it works for me. So there are many drafts where it's horrible essays on, medicine, surgery, or anything else, and then I'm able to let those go away. My brain has that information now, and then it will flow in a more creative way.
It's been fascinating talking to you.
Me too.
I think I want to ask you a little bit about Mary Sutter's, the book's ending, whether you knew what the ending was before you started the book, or whether you came up with more endings, and if you had to choose, that kind of thing. That I was pleased but surprised at the ending.
I'm glad to
So-
hear you were surprised.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad. I wrote probably, well, when I started, I had a vague idea of what would happen to her. In a novel, you always decide, a character wants something. Are they going to get it, or are they not going to get it? So I knew that particular outcome. There are many men in Mary's life, so one of the questions is, what will happen to her in that way? Will she ever find love? And no, I wrote that ending at least 3 different ways. And as I wrote them, they didn't quite ring true. I read and I thought, no, that doesn't satisfy my heart. So I had to go back and follow the desire line all the way through to see what it was that Mary really wanted in her heart. And I think I was able to find it.
Yeah, it certainly rings true to me. When you are out on the road and you're doing talks, discussions about your book, what are most people interested in? What do most people want to know? Is it different for if you're actually talking to the public or if you're being interviewed by a professional radio person or a journalist? Is it different, or do you get the same kinds of inquiries?
It's different every single time, and part of the reason I think that happens is because there are many threads to this book. There are many different subplots and many different subjects being interrogated, and so I think that portions of the book ring more true, or at least resonate more with one sort of person than with another. So it's been different, and in fact, each time I am with an audience, they ask different questions as well. Does one stand out more than another? No, I have to say it's been. Some people are very interested in the medicine. One place I was in Portland, Oregon, and somebody was asking an awful lot of medical questions, and of course later I learned it was somebody who's really interested in the history of medicine. It was a physician. Someone else was very interested in the history of nursing, because she, of course, was a nurse. And the love story, I think, is of interest to other people. So, I get all sorts of questions.
What appealed to me is, what I think it might. The reason I think it might have some universal appeal to women, at least, is because every woman I know faces decisions every day about a myriad of responsibilities they have, and how to choose who you're going to respond to and what demands you're going to be able to respond to at a particular time. So that conflict is, in my reading, was very, very personal. So, again, the history of the Civil War and the history of science, medicine. I think that's, in my opinion, for what it's worth, that may be why it has such universal appeal. So, thank you, Robin, for being with us. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and good luck in the future, and we will keep track of your writing career.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. This was great.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us, and Robin Oliveira. My name is Mary Sutter, is the name of her book, and see you next time.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.